Welcome, welcome, welcome. I am live. We are ready to go. Let me just share the link real quick. Ready to go. Oh, there we go. All right. Let's see here. 1 second. I'm just going to share the link on Twitter just for those who didn't know. But yeah, hit me up in the chat. Let me know how everybody's doing. How you guys doing tonight? What's going on? What are you guys up to other than watching your favorite conservatarian? Let's see. Okay. Hello there, Mrs. Pinky, Befrance Charles. Befrance, are we related? We've got the same last name, so we got to get together. Maybe we are related. Who knows? I'm doing well, brother. I'm doing well. Aja Smith is with us in the house. What's going on, Miss Aja? I think I'm the only one who pronounces your name right. All righty. All right. This is going to be a good one, I think. I spend a little bit more time preparing for it. And this is stuff that I've talked about. I mean, I've talked about a lot of this stuff, but I haven't gone as much into detail about my opinions on these things. And I've written articles about it. And you probably have seen me tweet about a lot of it, but I kind of want to go a little bit more in depth here, so we can get a better idea. I mean, I'm going to say a lot of things that need to be said. There'll be some people who aren't happy about it, but I mean, anytime somebody holds up a mirror to something that you're involved in, it's never pleasant. So, but I think that if we address these issues, it's going to benefit the conservative movement overall. All right. All right, I'm tweeting it out now. So let's see here. We got some more people coming in too. I'm gonna let a few more come in. All right, what's up, Benny? Mr. Julian, the blue collar intellectual, nice to see you. The Invisible Elephants podcast. Now, I don't think I've heard of that. You got to let me know who you are. That sounds intriguing to me. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. I'll try to pay attention to the chats as much as I can, but I'm still trying to get better at this. So definitely at the end, I'm going to take questions from the chat, but I'll try to pay attention to what you guys are saying if you're asking questions throughout the talk here, and try to address those as they come up. But if I don't get to it, then please pardon me and have a little bit of grace. So, all right. I need a co-host. Maybe I do. Okay. So the reason I'm doing this live stream is because I put out, a tweet asking for questions that people would want me to address in a live stream. And one of my followers asked a very good question, and I accused him of trying to get me in trouble. And I stand by that. I think he is trying to get me in trouble because he probably knows my opinion on a lot of these things. But he asked it's not just a good question. It's an important question. It's not just an important question for the conservative movement. I actually really think it's important that it get answered because it also impacts the Black community. If you follow me for any length of time, you know that I want to see a scenario where we have Black people voting for Republicans and Democrats as close to 50-50 as possible. It could be 60-40, it could be 45-55, whatever. But the problem that I'm seeing when it comes to government and the Black community is that if we're voting at 90% in one direction, that party doesn't have to do anything to earn our votes. And we're already seeing that with Biden right now. I'm not going to get too much into that, but that's just kind of been the history. Ever since the Republican Party abandoned the black vote, the Democrats have had black support up to 90%. And that's an issue because the Democrats know that we're always going to vote for them. If they didn't know that, they might actually have to implement actual solutions. And vice versa, same with the Republican Party. I don't want to see black people voting for the Republican Party at a rate of 90% because the Republican Party will just do exactly what the Democrats are doing right now. But this question is important because it addresses, I'll call it the elephant in the room on the right when it comes to the black community. So the question that he asked me, and before I even go there, this follower, I mean, he's followed me for a while, and we get along. He's more on the Democrat side, but I think he also sees the possible benefit of having more political power. So he asked me a very pointed question, and here it is: why can't black Republicans be pro-black, support black issues, call out white Republicans, and have a voice in the Republican Party? And he just said Republican Party, but I'm going to add on the conservative movement to that as well, because I see them as two separate entities. Now, I mean, obviously the Republican Party is supposed to be the vehicle through which the conservative movement pushes a conservative agenda, conservative policies, things like that. But I keep them separate for a reason. So I'm going to say the Republican Party and the conservative movement. And the issue here, there's a lot of different reasons for this. And to start out, I mean, first off, the answer, I mean, that people on the left would normally give would be, oh, it's because the Republican Party is racist, right? Most conservatives are racist, or there's a lot of racism in the conservative movement. And you know what? Racism does play a part, but not nearly to the extent that somebody on the left would argue. Like I posted a tweet earlier today pointing out issues with racism on the right, but there's racism on the left too. And I say just as much, it just takes a different form. I mean, on the left, they're more slick with their racism. They're able to hide it a little bit better. But I do think in answering this question, there is a racial element to it, but it's not by far the primary reason. I think that the bottom line is that there are some people on the right who really don't want to see more black people in their ranks. They might be willing to tolerate some of us who reflect their views of the black community, for instance. They would be okay with tolerating the quote unquote good ones, the ones who are willing to take on their view of the black community and not really push back on any of it. So when it comes to the racists on the right, that's really where they would be coming from. However, this element and this portion of the conservative movement is way too small to have really made this difference. They're way too small to have really influenced the conservative movement in this way to where the majority of conservatives actually share their feelings. So wanted to get that part out of the way. I think that it is a factor, but it's not a predominant factor. I mean, I think if I were to ask every single white conservative if they would like to see more black people coming over to the right, and more Latinos, more minorities in general, 98, 99% of them are going to say, yes, we would love to see that. And I'm going to touch on that a little bit later in this, because that's a very important factor here. The fact that the majority of white conservatives would not only not have a problem with seeing more black people in their ranks, but would love it. So here's another factor that's involved here. One of the reasons why this is the case is an issue that involves certain types of black conservatives, right? The conservative movement and the Republican Party are only willing to elevate black conservatives who reflect certain attitudes and opinions that they want their audience to embrace. They want their audience to view the black community in a very specific way. And this has been the case for the last 60 years. I would say starting with, the whole Goldwater thing back in the 60s, where he basically put the knife in the back of black GOP outreach. So there's a reason why they want their audience to view us a certain way that I'm going to get to in a second. But the conservative Inc. And when I say conservative Inc., I'm talking about the establishment. I'm talking about the establishment GOP. I'm talking about a lot of conservative media, pundits, leaders. A lot of these people want their audiences to view Black people in a certain light. So it behooves them to only elevate Black faces who are willing to carry that message to their audience. It means a lot more if it's somebody who's Black saying this to a predominantly white audience about the Black community, because that audience is more likely to believe them. So we already know some of the opinions that they want their audience to have of us. We know a lot of their talking points, but what we have to remember here is that their agenda is dependent on the ignorance of their audience. Most white conservatives, I would say, are ignorant about the Black community. Now, I don't say that as an insult, because every single one of us is ignorant about something. Ignorant, when I say ignorant, I don't mean dumb, I don't mean stupid. I just mean they just don't know certain things because they haven't seen it in person, or they haven't really been educated on it. And the establishment that they pay attention to, the media that they pay attention to, is misleading them and has misled them for decades. So in order for them to view us a certain way, they have to be ignorant about who the Black community really is and what it really means to be a Black person in America, especially a descendant of slaves, and also what it means to be a Black conservative. I mean, as most of you probably already know, most Black conservatives have conservative leanings. A lot of us are predominantly conservative. We may have some left-wing views, but most of our ideology is based on a certain type of conservatism. And a recent poll that came out last year showed that only about less than 25% of Black voters actually identify as liberal. The rest identify as moderate or conservatives, and yet they're voting for Democrats. So the messaging from the right, when it comes to politicians and the media, has a certain bent to it, and it also has a certain objective. So I'm going to answer the question: why do they want their audience to view the Black community in a certain light? Why do they want them to see us a certain way, and why are they not willing to tell the truth about the Black community and the history between the Republican Party and the Black community? So I got this book a while ago, and I need to get back to reading it, but I'm about a little over halfway through it. And it's called Republicans and the Black Vote. I'll show it to you, by Michael K. Fauntleroy. Yeah, hopefully the light isn't too much. Yeah, Republicans and the Black Vote. And this book goes over the history between the Black community and the Republican Party, and details how Black voters ended up going from Republicans to voting more for Democrats. And that'll actually be another live stream for another time, because I do want to dive deep into that history. But again, it's not the history that the establishment wants you to know. So I'm going to quote from a certain chapter of this book. And when I read this in the book, it's like this guy was saying what I've always thought. I've always had this suspicion and believed that this was the reason why Conservative Inc. doesn't tell the truth about the Black community, and why they won't tell the truth about the history. So let me grab the quote really quick here. Where'd it go? Okay. So here's the first quote, and this is all in the same paragraph. So the first part is, and the author is discussing, some of the reasons why people have believed that the Republican Party has had so much trouble reaching the Black community. Well, the reality is that they're not really having trouble with it. They just haven't bothered to do it. They didn't want to do it. So the quote says, and then there are cynics who wonder, GOP pronouncements notwithstanding, if Republicans really want Black votes, or just want to appear to want Black votes as a way of showing racial moderation. So he's intimating that they put on this charade, like as if they really want Black voters, because they want to be able to appeal to the center left. I mean, even to some people who are on the center right. And then he goes on, making the policy changes necessary to get large numbers of African American votes, after all, would alienate white conservatives. Now, before I go on, I'm going to pause on this because I think that this was true back in the 60s, maybe the 70s, 80s. I don't believe that that's true now. But the problem is that since they already adopted this habit, this tendency, since this became the paradigm on the right, they're still doing it, even if it's just for different reasons. I do not believe that if the Republican Party appealed more to minorities, they would lose white support, at least not in a significant enough number to make a difference, right? Like I said, the majority of white conservatives would love to see more Black people over on the right. So the next part of that quote is GOP pronouncements wanting African-American votes are not always aimed at Black America. They are often offered for the consumption of white middle-class suburban voters. And that is the most important part of this presentation that I'm giving right now. This has always been my theory, and I'm going to read it again. GOP pronouncements wanting African-American votes are not always aimed at Black America. They are often offered for the consumption of white middle-class suburban voters. Now, what comes to your mind when you hear that quote? Because I know what comes to my mind. It starts with a B and ends with a Lexit, right? Who was the main audience that they were appealing to? They weren't appealing to Black voters. I mean, they rarely even showed up in Black neighborhoods to host their events. Actually, I don't think they ever did. They went to Atlanta, but even the part in Atlanta that they went to was not a Black area. A lot of times they had to bus in Black people from other locations to make it seem as if they were actually appealing to Black voters. They made sure that they sat them in the front for that reason, because of the optics. But the reality is that it was never intended to try to get more Black people to leave the Democratic Party. And that may have ostensibly been their objective as far as what they said, but the way that they operated, the talking points they used, the fact that they didn't even talk directly to Black people demonstrates to me that that was never really the goal, unless they are guilty of a depressing level of ineptitude. Because any common sense would tell anybody, if you want to get more Black voters, you got to talk to Black people. You have to actually sit down and have some conversations, some honest conversations. And a lot of people in Conservative Inc. refuse to do that. But what they do is they elevate a certain type of Black conservatives, the Blexit types. I call them Black Conservative Inc. So Conservative Inc. and then there's Black Conservative Inc. Same difference. But I use Black Conservative Inc. to have a little bit more specificity as to what I'm talking about. So that right there is my ultimate theory. Now, can I read minds? Can I look into their hearts and know exactly why they're doing what they're doing? No, but actions do speak louder than words. On the right, we've been doing these things for 60 years and it hasn't worked. It hasn't moved the needle at all. So after a certain period of time, I'm thinking, yeah, you're kind of doing this on purpose. Maybe the first 10, 20 years, I'm like, okay, you still have to try to put this into action and, and see if it'll eventually work. It's already proven to not work. So this is really the crux of the matter. I think that the GOP still wants its audience to believe that they want to get Black voters when they really don't. And the reason why is because they know something. They know exactly what I said just a few minutes ago. They know that their audience wants more minorities on the right. White conservatives are tired of being called racist all the time for no good reason. They're tired of being labeled as bigots just because they don't agree with the left. The left is actually willing to have the conversation on race, but for the most part, they lie about it. I mean, you might have some on the left who are willing to have honest conversations, but again, these aren't people who have huge microphones over on the left. So the problem is that by doing this, they have allowed the left to take over the conversation. And instead of actually engaging in it, they put more energy into convincing their audience that they actually care about these things when they really don't. Actually, I'm going to check the chat real quick just to see if anybody has any questions. Also, if you're in here and you have not subscribed to my YouTube channel, shame. For shame. Subscribe, hit that subscribe button. And also please share this. So I want to get as many people in here as possible. So let's see. I need to buy Candace's book Blackout. Yeah, I'll talk about her in a second. Yeah, the goal was to make money and sell books. That's a lot of it. Now, I don't think that was always the case. Like in the 90s and the early 2000s, I think that was there, but I think it's even more so now. I mean, we didn't have, the level of griftiness back then that we do now, but I still think that there's a lot of truth to what you're saying there. Let's see. I have watched almost all Blexit event videos, same talking points. You're right. It's almost like they have a script. It's almost like they have a manual that they have to follow, full of talking points that I'm actually writing right now. And I'm sure you have seen me tweet about it. I am working on a book. I'm almost done with it, but it's a satirical look at GOP black outreach. So let's see. You can't use talking down to black folk to gain black folk. Yes, exactly. But again, that's not really the objective. And here's the thing. I don't think that everybody involved in this actually knows that this is why they're doing it. I think a lot of these people sincerely believe that what they're doing is going to lead to a black exodus from the Democratic Party. I mean, our pundits, our leaders, they can be deceived too. I mean, and since this messaging is so entrenched on the right, it's really hard to get out of that mindset, especially since if you don't have that mindset, they're not going to promote you. So looking at it from their point of view, they're like, well, I want to make a difference. I may not agree with everything that they want me to say, but the only chance that I have is to, play ball and hope that I'm able to make somewhat of a difference. So let me go back here. Okay. So I talked about the reasoning as to why they push this narrative about black people. But here's the thing. What solidifies this for a white conservative audience, like I said before, is the fact that black faces are willing to repeat these falsehoods about the black community. And when I talk about their falsehoods, every falsehood that they tell has a level of truth to it, right? It does have a modicum of reality, but then they either leave out stuff that they don't want you to know that might change your view, or they'll straight lie about it. So, I mean, but I would say for the most part, they lie by omission, because that's really how the media lies anyway. It's predominantly they lie by not by making up facts, but by leaving certain facts out that don't promote their agenda. So the reason why, so to kind of tie this into the question that was asked, the reason why pro-black voices are kept out of the limelight by gatekeepers, the reason that the gatekeepers work so hard to keep people like myself and Sonny Johnson and others out of the limelight, is because they know we're going to tell the audience the truth about the establishment, about the Republican Party and the history. And we're going to tell the truth about that instead of only talking about how Democrats are the real racists. We have no problem criticizing the conservative movement as we do the Democrats for what they've done. But we will bring up the fact that the reality is that the conservative movement has failed to engage with black voters. That is the reason why black people vote 90% for Democrats. It's not because of the reasons that they bring up. It's because the Republican Party over time gave up on it. And that started shortly after slavery was abolished. That started right after Reconstruction. After that ended, then you had the Republican Party doing more of this pivot to appeal to white voters in the South. So some people think that it took place after the 60s. No, it actually started then with the Lily White movement. But I have to avoid getting too much into that because I want to do that in a different broadcast. But basically, just know that it's not because black people just went socialist all of a sudden. It's because the Republican Party stopped competing. Now, the other thing here is that they've been very successful at crafting certain narratives about the black community. You've heard the talking points. Black people just want free stuff. Black people don't care about black on black crime or gang violence. They only care about it when a police officer kills a black person. Or they're obviously vote for Democrats because they are mental slaves on some fictional Democrat plantation. The overall objective is to portray the Black community in a negative light. Now, that sounds pretty strong, right? And again, watch what they do. And what they do and the things they say lets me know what's in their heart. If you're a Christian, you know what the Bible says. Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks, right? So to me, here's how I know this. When was the last time you ever heard Candace Owens say anything positive about the Black community? You know, what about Brandon Tatum, Larry Elder, Jesse Lee Peterson? I'll give you a second to kind of think about that. Like, when was the last time you heard them say something positive about Black culture or Black people in general? Yeah, it hasn't happened. You're not going to find it. You can Google it if you want. You're not going to find it. You may find certain instances where they might compliment a specific Black person, most likely if they had a MAGA hat on, but they're not going to talk about the richness of our culture and how rich our history is. They don't deal with that because that's not what they're there for. So the thing is that they're there to tell their audience that Black people are a certain way. We just want free stuff. We all grow up without fathers. And again, a lot of these things have an element of truth to them, but not like they're saying. And they're not honest about the reasons why, like for instance, why a lot of Black people live in poverty or why a lot of Black people used welfare. They're not honest about the reasons for that. They just say, oh, it's because the fathers aren't there, or because they're lazy, or because they listen to too much hip hop. Those are their talking points. That's what they say about Black people. And this is why Conservative Inc. celebrates people like Candace Owens, who says that Black culture is a joke and that Black people who don't vote Republican are mentally enslaved. It's why they promote people like Brandon Tatum, who likes to make disparaging remarks about Black women. And he's got some of his own issues going on right now, if you've been paying attention to conservative Twitter. But it's why they like Jesse Lee Peterson. I mean, who said that he can't think of a single thing that Black people have been involved in that we haven't destroyed. So it's going to be very difficult for somebody to convince me that these people actually like Black people. Here's the thing. If they like Black people, they have a funny way of showing it. They're not good at expressing that. I mean, what comes out of their mouths not only are lies, but they've never lied to make it seem like Black people are better than they are, right? I mean, it's part and parcel of their objective to con white conservatives who want to see more Black people on the right into thinking that the reasons why Black people vote for Democrat has nothing to do with anything that the conservative movement did in the past and even now. They don't want their audience to know that the Republican Party is to blame for why Black people won't vote for them anymore. So that again ties back to the question. The reason why supposed pro-Black conservatives, pro-Black conservatives, and non-establishment Black conservatives, the reason why we don't have as much of a voice is because the establishment knows that we would blow up these narratives. We would expose the fact that white conservatives have been lied to. And so again, sometimes it's intentional and sometimes it's not. And they don't want that to happen. They know that Black conservatives like myself, others, that I've named, we're not afraid to do what the establishment doesn't want us to do. We're not afraid to highlight the positive aspects of the Black community while discussing the negative aspects of the Black community. We're not afraid to talk about the positives of Black culture and the negatives of Black culture. In short, we're not afraid to talk about Black people like regular Black people do. Because if you've talked to a lot of Black Democrats, they will bring up negative parts about Black culture or Black history. They'll bring up a lot of this stuff. But you don't know that because, or a lot of white conservatives don't know that because their media tells them that we don't talk about these things, that we just make it sound like everything is about racism. And by the way, another reason why they won't deal with people like myself is because I'm not afraid to acknowledge the historical and present impact of racism on the Black community. Now, I'm not, what's that guy? I'm not Ta-Nehisi Coates. I'm not going to pretend like racism just pervades every element of our society. I'm not going to pretend like Black people can't succeed because of racism. But I'm also not going to pretend like it doesn't have an impact and that it's not present. So that is the reason why people such as myself might not have as much of a voice, although I do think that that is changing. But this is why that has historically been the case. And I think that a lot of white and Black conservatives have been not brainwashed, because I don't like using that word, but maybe indoctrinated or just not being exposed to more information about the Black community. So, I mean, that talking points, I think that a lot of these people echo these talking points and they have never even questioned them. They've never even thought, well, wait, maybe that's not quite right. Like, for instance, when I see people talking about being pro-Black, I see the objections they get. What's one that they get? Well, why can't we be pro-white? They love that one. And the answer is obvious. I mean, it should be obvious. And I've had a lot of white conservatives say that they know why that argument is silly. But just for the ones who may not know, it's because you don't need to be pro-white. I mean, this country was already set up to favor white Americans. There's no shame in admitting that. It's not your fault. You didn't do it. I didn't do it. But that is how it was set up. And that still has ramifications on today. White people haven't had oppression in America the way that Black people have, or Native Americans, or what have you. So there isn't really a reason to be pro-white. I mean, the thing is, pro-Blackness was a response to the American government and American society treating us like we're substandard. That didn't happen by and large to white people. Now, I'm just going to add this in here. I'm not saying that, people shouldn't celebrate their culture. I mean, if people say, I'm proud of my Irish ancestry, or they're proud of being French, or they're proud of being German, or what have you, that's your prerogative. I actually think you should. I mean, I think it's kind of tragic that Americans seem to have lost that connection to their heritage. There's nothing to be ashamed of. I mean, I think that Irish culture is great. I like it. Boondock Saints is one of my favorite movies. No, I'm just playing. But seriously, I mean, I don't really see why that's a thing. Maybe somebody can explain that to me, but I'll move on. The next talking point, that the next objection that I see a lot is, well, why not just identify as American? You see a lot of Black people saying this, well, I'm not Black, I'm American. Here's the thing. Being pro-Black is not being anti-American. All it means is that we're proud of our culture and our history. You can be pro-Black and American at the exact same time. It's actually possible. I refer to myself as a Black American. There's nothing wrong with that. Black culture is a thing. And I know people want to try to muddy the issue by saying, oh, well, what's Black culture? I mean, you've got people from Nigeria, you've got people, I'm specifically talking about Black American culture. There is a distinct Black American culture. And there's not really an effective way to muddy that issue. I mean, they'll say, well, what about the difference between Black people in the South and Black people in rural areas? No, I mean, there is an overarching Black culture. There are certain things that we have in common, just like there's an overarching American culture that we all kind of adhere to. We all have these cultural norms. So it's okay to celebrate that culture. And the other thing, I mean, something that people really don't want to deal with, you don't see conservatives taking issue with Koreans for celebrating their culture, or Latinos. There's a lot of different cultures within Latino. You don't see anybody complaining about that. Nobody says, oh, why do you identify as a Latino? You should just identify as an American. Why do you identify as Asian? You should just identify as American. You don't really see that. That is specifically reserved for Black people for some reason. And again, I think it's because people just repeat this stuff without thinking about it. They've never sat back and questioned, well, wait a minute, is this really a big deal? I mean, why can't they identify as pro-Black? It doesn't mean that they hate us. And again, this is something that, I mean, if you're familiar with Cherise Lane, she has to say this all the time, but it's true. Being pro-Black is not being anti-white. We're not the Nation of Islam over here. We don't hate white people. That's not a thing. So saying that I'm proud of the history of Black American culture doesn't mean that I don't like white people. It's ridiculous. Even if you don't even have to do that much critical thinking to figure that part out, right? So the bottom line is, I mean, the reason why I'm even addressing this is because it is important for the conservative movement. I'm not on the left, so I'm not criticizing the conservative movement because I want to see it die. It's quite the opposite. The reason why I'm criticizing this aspect of the conservative movement is because I want to see it thrive. And I recognize that it will not thrive if it only appeals to one type of American. It has to appeal to the rest of the country. And it's okay to say, you know, this is how conservative solutions can benefit certain Black communities, whether it's in Chicago, they love Chicago. You know, present conservative solutions to people living in Baltimore or DC or Los Angeles or what have you. This is the type of stuff that turns Black people off. Messaging is important. You can deny it all you want, but messaging is important. And the fact that the Republican Party historically has, you know, at least in the past 60 years, hasn't bothered to speak to Black people face to face and engage with them about what they need and what they want or the problems that they're facing. That's why Black people vote Democrat at a rate of 90%. Democrats at least show up. They at least pretend to care. And you know what? I'm going to say something that you might not like. There are plenty of Democratic politicians who actually do care and want to make a difference. They have the wrong solutions, but they are sincere. So Black people will take somebody who's sincere, even though they know that they may not have all the answers, over the party who demeans them and basically shows that they're not really interested. So that is pretty much the answer. And the reason, again, that I'm bringing that up, Amaj Toure, he posted a tweet and he posted a poll. And he asked this question: can the current crop of popular Black conservatives get more of the Black community to align with conservatism politically? Now, the answer to that question is no, they can't. And even this current batch, I mean, it's really just an extension of what's been done before. Nothing that, you know, Candace Owens or Brandon Tatum or Larry Elder, nothing that they say is new. This didn't just come out. I mean, I think it's new to a lot of white conservatives who haven't been as involved with politics or haven't paid attention as much. But these talking points go back decades. I mean, even in my early days of being in the early 2000s, I was hearing the same stuff. I was hearing the same Democratic plantation. Black people just want free stuff. You know, Black people don't care about Black on Black crime, gang violence, whatever. You know, I've been hearing the same talking points, or racism doesn't exist, or it only exists a little bit, or it only exists on the left. It's just regurgitating the same crap that's been spewed for decades and hasn't done anything. But again, like I said, it was never intended to. So that's pretty much what I wanted to say there. Now, I will say, again, I am seeing positive signs. There are a lot of white conservatives who are getting it. And, you know, especially when I saw how they reacted to the shooting of Ahmaud Arbery. Yes, you had the loud people who were pretending like he deserved it or that he was a burglar or whatever, but the vast majority of white conservatives saw that that was wrong. They may not have known whether it was racist or not, although I think they, by now, with the facts that came out, they probably do. But not a single one of them, or I shouldn't say not a single one, the vast majority of them think that the McMichaels and the other guys should be in jail. Same thing with George Floyd. Yeah, you've got the loud ones who will say that, oh, he died of an overdose, even though the medical examiner clearly said that he died of a homicide. Now, you can debate whether it's murder or not, but I mean, again, the vast majority of conservatives, white conservatives, say that that officer shouldn't have done what he did. This would not have been the case 10 years ago. They would have all been siding with the police officers. They would have been siding with the McMichaels. They would have been portraying Ahmaud Arbery as a thug, just like you see some people doing. But it's not. But it's no longer the majority. So I am seeing more people who are willing to change their minds, more people who are willing to hear alternative points of view from Black conservatives. To give you an example, I mean, I was on. If you're familiar with Jesse Kelly, I was on his radio show about 3 or 4 weeks ago. Because I was criticizing conservatives for referring to Black Lives Matter as a terrorist organization, which, I mean, if you know how I feel about them, you know that I'm not always a fan of them. Like, I have a lot of issues with Black Lives Matter, especially the national movement. But he had me on a show so we can talk about this because he disagreed with me. But I got the opportunity to educate him about Black Lives Matter and tell him, the national organization, there's a difference between the national organization and then the local chapters. I explained to him that the local Black Lives Matter in Utah, they even supported a Republican candidate. They even stood with the Proud Boys during a press conference to speak out against police brutality. So the local chapters aren't necessarily the same as the national organization. And the way he reacted, he said, I didn't know that. He said, I'm glad to hear that there are elements of Black Lives Matter that aren't on board with all of the, defund the police and all the really far left socialist agenda that they're trying to push. He was open to hearing something that hasn't been said by a lot of people in his position as a political commentator. So I think that more people are becoming open to it. And I think people are at a point where they just want to make a difference. They want to see some change instead of just hearing the Republican Party talking about it. They like the fact that Donald Trump actually reached out to Black Americans. You only have a few that were mad at him for doing it. So I think that, I went a lot negative during this presentation because the answer to the question is negative, but I do want to inject some positivity here. I think things are changing and hopefully they'll change quickly. So with that, I'll go to the chat, see what you guys got to say. Get a little sippy sip. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. Let's see. Let me go back up here. And also, if you have any questions, put them in the chat, and I'll try to answer them. I'm gonna go. Let's see. All right. All right, Patriot J. Yeah, you're right, dude. I'll never really understand that. I think the people who say that they're not pro-Black, they can say whatever they want. They can have whatever attitudes they want. It just doesn't really make much sense. Being pro-Black isn't different from being pro-American. As a matter of fact, they're the same thing because Black people are part of America. Let's see. For white conservatives, they think America is a utopia and that Black Americans, ADOS, have no real different grievances. You're actually right about that. And again, I don't think that they believe this because they just want to believe it. I honestly think that a lot of these people just legitimately don't understand these issues because they haven't been told. I had a conversation. This was sometime last year with Ross Schumann. I was on his podcast, and I asked him why a lot of white conservatives, view Black people the way that they do, and how that comes about. And he told me, and he was the perfect person to ask this question because he grew up in a rural area here in Texas, not too far from me, actually. We need to hang out. But he grew up in a rural area, wasn't exposed to a whole lot of Black people. He had some Black neighbors, but he thought that the narrative that the media pushes, which, by the way, it's not just conservative media. Left-wing media pushes a horrible narrative about Black people, too. So they portray us a lot in the same way. So he grew up watching that. So if that's all he sees, that's what he thinks. And so even though he knew Black people, he had a Black neighbor, he said he just assumed that guy was like the exception to the rule. It wasn't until he joined the military and he was around a lot of other Black people that he realized, wait a minute, this isn't true. What I think about Black people is not true. I'm not saying he was racist. He just had faulty views. He had wrong views that were given to him by the media. And I know it sounds like I blame everything on the media, which I kind of do, because the media does have that level of power, especially back then. But when he saw something different, he changed his mind. So I think a lot of this is due to honest ignorance. And I've had a lot of white conservatives, come to me and they'll hit me up in my DMs and they'll say, you know what? I didn't agree with a lot of what you said at first, but when I actually started to think about it, I realized that I just didn't know the things that you were saying. I didn't know the facts that you were telling us. So I think a lot of this will be defeated by education. Let's see. What else we got here? We need a forum to discuss this. Yes, we do, Aja. We do. I'm trying to discuss it right now. I'm going to keep discussing it, but we do need more of a discussion. We do need more of a platform. And I do think that day is coming. As more people, the thing is that, before 2000, you would never see a person like me on, say, Fox News or what have you. But with social media, with YouTube, we can get around that. Just like conservatives got around the left's hold on the mainstream media through the internet, I can get around what a lot of the gatekeepers want. I mean, they can't control what I do on Twitter. They can't control what I write on my blog. And I'm fortunate to be able to write for a site like Red State, which has quite a few Black writers who we may not agree on everything, but they have a lot of the same views that we do. And so that audience gets exposed to something different. Let's see. Boondock Saints is a Boston thing, but it's an awesome thing. It's one of my favorite movies. I watch it every St. Patty's Day, except last year, but this year I'll be watching it. Both movies. Let's see. We created Black American culture. Yeah, Black American culture is a thing. I mean, if you ask any Black person who isn't a part of Black Conservative Inc., they will tell you that. Let's see. Okay. Yeah, that's true. We don't see white people saying that. Well, here's the thing, though. I mean, a lot of white people, again, I don't know why this is, but they don't identify as Irish or Italian, or they do if you ask them. They'll say, "Oh yeah, I have Irish ancestry," but they're maybe not in touch with that culture. But none of them are going to say that they're not Irish and that they're just American. They'll say, "Oh no, I have Irish ancestry." Nothing wrong with that. I think it's great that we have so many different cultures. I think it's a beautiful thing. This isn't something that we should shy away from. We should lean into that. We should embrace it. Let's see. Blacks will find each other in a crowd. Yes, we do. Well, we've got the Black male acknowledgement when you're in a room full of mostly white people and you see that one Black person all the way across the room. There's that nod that we do, that acknowledgement. So let's see. Yeah, the difference is that Black people have a stronger connection to community due to a shared history in this country. That's true. And that's part of Black culture. I mean, if you're a Black person in the South, you share that in common with the Black person living up north in Chicago. Give the nod, yeah. Let's see, what else we got? That's why I think we all know each other. I never thought about it that way. Maybe that's why, because of that tendency to find each other, they think that we just all know each other. Let's see what else we got here. Let's see. Brandon talked like all Black people live in Chicago. Yeah, I actually think that that's a mistake that a lot of people make, not just on the right. I think they just think that all Black people live in the hood or they all live in bad areas. I think most of us live in decent areas, suburbs and stuff like that. I'm not saying that there's not a wealth disparity, but the vast majority of Black people are not living in poverty. So yeah, I mean, but again, the way the media portrays it, and again, on the left and the right, is that we're all just living on the streets and on welfare and yada, yada, yada. So, but it's not really true, which is why a lot of the messaging doesn't work. I mean, if you're saying you can't, it was Solomon from the Brown Paper Bag podcast that was on YouTube. He has his own thing now. Shout out to Solomon Graham. But I mean, he brought up a really good point when we talked about this. He says, he lives in a relatively affluent area of Atlanta. So if the Republican Party goes to him talking about, well, this is how we'll deal with crime. Well, he doesn't deal with a lot of crime in his community, just like a lot of other Black people don't. You got to talk to them where they live. You got to talk about economics. I mean, economics is an overarching thing for everybody. So let's see what else we got here. Both sides don't want to break that 30-year-old narrative. Yep. That's true. That's true. This is a good point. Every small business owner in Black communities should be a GOP committee attendee. That is actually another way that we will get more of a voice in the GOP. Now, what I didn't want to talk about that aspect of it. This was more addressed to the overarching conservative movement and the Republican Party and why, as a whole, they have failed to reach Black voters. But I think when they finally get their shit together and start, getting rid of the stupid on our side, we will be able to encourage more Black people to attend GOP meetings. You may even get Black people who attend Democratic and Republican Party meetings. I wouldn't have a problem with that. Let's see what else we got here. Anybody else have any questions or comments? Let's see. No, I think we're good. So, of course, Candy. Is that Tatey or Tatty? Candy and Tatey exist to make white conservatives feel better about their views of the Black community. I think that might apply to some white conservatives, but not to most. I think that they just reaffirm what they've already been taught about Black people. I think that's what the issue is. I think a lot of white conservatives wouldn't have a problem learning that the talking points that they were given aren't true. I've experienced that. I mean, when I talk about, economic hardships, or I talk about police brutality, or I talk about poverty, or I talk about why Black people vote for Democrats, they're open to the new information. A lot of people will change their minds if given new information. Not everybody. I mean, and this has nothing to do with race. I mean, it's just a human thing. I mean, when you hear something that is opposite of what you've been hearing all your life, you get cognitive dissonance. So you do whatever you need to do to lessen the pain and discomfort that comes from that cognitive dissonance. So it is difficult to persuade people, but we don't have to persuade everybody. We don't have to persuade everybody on the right. We just have to persuade as many people as possible, and to persuade people in power, because the more this message is repeated, the more pundits who actually learn the truth and are willing to talk about it, the more people will be convinced. All right, let's see. Anything else? Oh, this is interesting. Oh, there's two interesting ones. Okay, if I have to hear about Ron DeSantis one more time, he's growing on me. I mean, I don't have any issues with him. I think he's okay. I want to see more from him. I want to learn more about him. I know people are putting him forward for president. I'm not there yet because I'm thinking more about 2022 right now. But from what I've seen, I don't have an issue with him. I think he's a decent leader. He seems like he might have what it takes. He actually reached out to minorities to win governor. So I don't have any issues with him. I know that if he were to run, he wouldn't hold Black people at arm's length. He's not going to run from them. He's going to talk to them. Let's see. There is a gap between new Trump Black conservatives and those of us who have been in for a while. Yes, you are 150% right. Now, here's the thing about a lot of the new Trump Black conservatives. A lot of them were Democrats 5 minutes ago. That doesn't just apply to Black conservative influencers. That applies to a lot of influencers who rose up in the ranks during Trump. I don't blame Trump for this, but a lot of influencers don't really know much about conservatism. They haven't done a whole lot of reading. They don't have the foundation. They do have the passion, which I like, but there is a difference. And I think that part of being successful, I mean, we talk about this on the Black Roundtable, me and Roderick Threeds and James Chief. We talk about how, the people who came up under Trump, all they need is a little bit of guidance and direction and some more education on the foundational principles of conservatism, and they'll be fine. But the problem is that a lot of them don't have that. They just like Trump and they like populism, but none of that is long lasting. I mean, a movement based on a person is not going to last. So they do need to have a foundation in actual conservatism. They don't need to know everything, but they do. I think a lot of them do need to have more of a grounding. So hopefully that's something that happens, in the future. I mean, we're already in a civil war in the GOP. So hopefully the non-establishment side will win out. Let's see. Can I show the book again? No, just kidding. Here it is. I'll also put this in the notes too, but it's called Republicans and the Black Vote by Michael K. Fauntleroy. Now, you can't get this as an ebook. I had to order it directly from the publisher, actually. You can't even get it on Amazon. So you know what? I will put all the links in the show notes here because I had to kind of go through a process. I had to go through the publisher and order the book from them. It wasn't too expensive. I think it was like $20 or less than $20. Great book, though. Great book. I would also recommend The Loneliness of the Black Republican by I can't remember that girl's name. I'm like a big fan of hers, and I'm having a total brain fart right now. Black Republican by Dr. Leah Wright Rigueur. So that's another good one to read too. Let's see. Oops, I'm in the wrong spot here. Oh, there we go. That's a good point. Too many confuse the principles, the party platform, and the candidate. Yeah. I mean, and that's an issue, right? I mean, the good thing that I will say about Trump, though, is that at least a lot of the policies that he pushed are actual conservative policies. So I think that that's a good place to start. I don't think that President Trump really has an ideology. He's a populist. He just happens to be right-leaning. But I think that once we get more of an education on conservative principles, we'll be able to sell it better. Let's see. No, they don't know anything about the party history, struggle, etc. They just wanted to cash out. Yeah, I mean, it's grifting season, like Uncle Hotep says. It's grifting season, and we're still seeing it. There's still grifters out there. Oh, I want to talk about them, but I don't have the time. But yeah, that'll be another one. But I mean, if you saw the grifties, you know it's still grifting season. Shout out to Hotep Nation. Shout out to Hotep Jesus, Uncle Hotep. Let's see. Okay, this is interesting. Black Elephants in the Room is a good book to see pro-Black versus colorblind Black conservatives. I think I may have seen that. I'm going to check that out. Thanks for bringing that up. Let's see. All right. So I think we're good now. I think I'm going to sign off. I need to have dinner. So, but thanks for coming. I appreciate it. Please do me a favor and subscribe if you haven't already. Share this video, please. I mean, I'm about halfway to where I need to be as far as YouTube goes to where I can start monetizing it. A lot of you know that I'm a full-time content creator now, but I'm halfway there. And once I get there, I can start monetizing this as another channel, which means I can start doing more of these more often. So please share it twice, share it 3 times. I appreciate it. But other than that, thank you very much, and I will see you next time.